Hi, my name's Steve from 3D-Hub. This is a follow-on video really from the first one. In the first video, I don't know if you remember, we discussed what the 3D-Hub website, the portal as it were, for downloading 3D stereoscopic educational content, and we also talked quite a bit about the 3D-Hub media player. This is the player that, if you remember, would open stereoscopic 2D pictures, stereoscopic video. It would also allow you to open and manipulate simple 3D assets which could be created either in an OBJ file format, STL file format, or an OFF file format. So they were really sort of the basics of being able to get and create content simply and easily into the 3D-Hub player. This presentation really is going to cover the more advanced aspects of content creation using the 3D-Hub content creation SDK, which you can get from the site. In addition to the toolkit, you will require some standard off-the-shelf software tools. These are 3D Studio Max. We support versions 2009 currently to 2012. Obviously 2013 will be supported shortly. This modeling package is used to create the actual models and animations itself. In addition to the 3D Studio Max, we use PowerPoint. PowerPoint 2003 all the way through 2010 is supported, and this really is used to create the interface and the interaction between the models and the user. In addition to Max and PowerPoint, you also need the Instant Effects Presenter plugin. This is the main tool used to integrate the 3D Studio Max assets into PowerPoint. In addition to the PowerPoint plugin, we have what we call the FXML Export Utility plugin. Now this is a plugin that's required by 3D Studio Max to export the data, all the 3D geometry and the animation and all the materials from 3D Studio Max into a file format that the Instant Effects Presenter plugin can pull into PowerPoint. And one other thing that we do, which we do supply to you, which is really useful, is the UDP Max script. Okay, so this is how the different tools and software interact with each other to produce the interactive models. First of all, we start with 3D Studio Max. As I said, we model the assets, we do the animation, we add scripts to some of the objects which will give them unique properties for when we bring them into PowerPoint. We then use the FXML export plugin. Now this translates the Max geometry into a file format that Presenter, which is the plugin for PowerPoint, can understand. So that will create what we call a 3D insert scene. And then that insert scene is inserted into PowerPoint. And like I said, this is the environment that we use to add the interface. Now once we've added the interface, and we can test all the interactions and the animations, we can then export it into two file types. One which is an FXP file. That's really a collection of all the data, so you can transfer it from machine to machine. So if you've created a lesson in PowerPoint using a load of assets from 3D Studio Max and you want to give that to another user to be able to carry on working collaboratively on that project, then you would create an FXP file, and that basically, once you've exported it from PowerPoint, you can then take it to a new machine and re-import it into PowerPoint, and that will put all the assets in the right place for you to carry on working. The other file format which we can export, which was picked up on the first tutorial video, is an FXD file format. Now that's the native file format that will play in the 3D-Hub media player. That's the file that we upload effectively to the website, and then when the end user purchases that media, that's what's used to create the FZD file, which is the encrypted file that the 3D-Hub player plays. So looking at the Max integration side, the tools that we have are obviously the UDP Max script, and I said that's used to generate the user-defined properties for the assets within 3D Studio Max. And we also have an FXML export utility. This is a plugin used to create 3D insert scenes. Now the 3D insert scenes are what we pull into PowerPoint using the Presenter plugin, and that's effectively all of the 3D data, all the geometry, all the materials, all the animation, all the interaction that we've assigned the objects in 3D Studio Max. That's what we use to transfer that information forward in the process. When we're exporting things from 3D Studio Max, there's a few things we have to be aware of. Firstly, when we talk about the geometry, when we export from 3D Studio Max, it's the end state of the modifier stack that's exported. So if you are used to using bend modifiers, twist modifiers, slice modifiers, any of the modifiers that you use, it will just collapse the stack and it will export the final snapshot, as it were. Now the export plugin does work with instances, so you can use instances. The amount of tessellation in your meshes, they'll all export smoothly from 3D Studio Max into the 3D-Hub authoring software. Also things like smoothing and the amount of smoothing, mapping, that will also go through UV maps, unwrap maps, they all go through the process. That's not a problem. One thing that's actually quite useful is also hidden objects. They're not exported. So if you are working a large scene and you've got various different assets and you just want to try exporting a small amount of it, if you hide some of the assets or put them on a layer and turn that layer off, they won't be exported. It'll only be the visible objects that are exported in the FXML plugin. Following on from the objects, let's talk a bit about the materials. Now, one thing you'll notice that as soon as you try and use the export plugin and you haven't got a material assigned to everything, you will get an error message. It will tell you which objects not had material applied to it, so it's quite easy to go back and actually fix the problem. Again, it can just be a basic grey shader. It doesn't need to be anything exotic. You just need to have a material assigned to an object for it to export. The pipeline that we work with is a DirectX 7 fixed function pipeline. So all things like the ambient, diffuse and specular colors from a material, they'll all export, along with things like the highlight level, glossiness, softness, all the specular information, they'll go. Opacity works. You can decrease the amount of opacity either in the curves, the animation curves, or via the material. They'll all work. Self-illumination, two-sided, so if you take the two-sided object in the material, you won't get any backface culling when it comes to the export. The diffuse, reflection, opacity match, you can get some really nice effects using the reflection part of the material. Again, bitmaps, they're fully supported. The offset, tiling and rotation, all the information for those are pulled through. Particularly useful really is the offset bitmap option. We use that quite a lot to animate materials. And again, whether the material's tiled on or off, there's the tick box in your material that will pull through in the export as well. As far as bitmap support, we will support TGA files, PNG files, JPEG files. For transparency, only TGA or PNG files are supported. Animated textures, we do support AVI files, WMV files, MPEG-1, MPEG-2. We even support a fill and key format. So if you want an animated video with a transparency, we can support that very easily using something like a WMV file. Now, natively, a WMV file doesn't have an alpha channel, but what we do is, if you can imagine, we call fill and key, which is you'd have your standard layer, as it were, full color in one half of the video, the left-hand side, and what we do is we have what we call the key channel, which is a black and white opacity map, an animated opacity map in the right-hand side of the video. So at runtime, one is superimposed over the other, the white being the opaque part of your video and the black being the transparent part of the video. Other things that are supported, lights, we do support up to 8 lights per insert scene. Now we pull through the color, we pull through the multiplier, the hotspot, the fall off. The near attenuation is supported. We don't support currently shadows, ambient light, things like that. And as far as cameras are concerned, free and target cameras, they're all supported. You can use the field of view, aspect ratios, clipping plane parameters. They all work. The only things that you can animate are the position and the rotation of the camera. We don't support things like field of view or clipping planes that are being animated, and we don't currently support orthographic cameras. With the animation controllers, we support all the usual Bezier and linear floats. Other controllers, so if you were to use, let's say, a sine wave controller or a waveform controller, these controllers can be used. The controllers are interpolated according to the frame sampling rate set in the exporter. Out of range controllers, they work really well. We use them all the time for things like obviously rotating objects that continuously spin. If you want things to ping pong or cycle through, these work really well, and again they export fine. Another facet of the export facility is parenting. We do support object and dummy attributes such as animation and position, visibility. Just so you know, the visibility, we can't apply a visibility to a dummy, so you do have to use objects when parenting for visibility reasons. That brings us on to the 3D-Hub specific tips. This is really a list of do's and don'ts that we use to make sure that what we see in 3D Studio Max is similar or exactly the same to what the user experiences once they get it into the 3D-Hub player. So for instance, we only use standard materials for each of the models. We don't support architectural materials. If you do use the architectural materials in 3D Studio Max and try and export them, you normally just get an error, and if you don't get the error message, then the material certainly won't be reproduced in the 3D-Hub player. Again, that works with mental ray shaders, V-ray shaders, that they're just simply not supported. It is really just a standard material, 3D Max materials. We do support DirectX shaders. That's another topic that we will cover at a later date. If you're used to using 3D packages, you'll also know that it's very useful to have good descriptive names in all your meshes and planes. If you start using the self-generated names that 3D Max reiterates, then you will get problems down the line when you start combining 3D assets, because when you start to use more than one 3D insert scene in a lesson and they all share similar names, that's when you'll start to get some weird problems. So not only should the meshes all have unique names, it's best to also have the materials that you're using have unique names as well, and just logical ones. Other tips, you can use multi-materials. They do work reasonably well. We don't necessarily condone them as such, because if you want to start to animate the mesh visibility, or you want to actually do unusual things to different parts of the multi-material, that's when problems start occurring. So it's always better to use, we find, separate materials on separate parts of the mesh. Going back to what I said earlier, we only try and use a diffuse reflection opacity maps and a standard material. Additional map types can be used with the DirectX shaders provided with Presenter, but that does require special setup, and we will be covering it in a further lesson, but it won't be in this one. And the penultimate thing, all texture mapping must be done using images. We don't support procedural textures, so things like gradients or noises. And the final thing, which is quite self-explanatory, when you start to author lessons for 3D-Hub Player, you'll find that everything that you can pick up, you can spin through 360 degrees. And if you were to turn an object around and it wasn't lit from all sides, then obviously the back side of it will be dark. It's a bit like the dark side of the moon. So what you try and do realistically is to light from all the angles. You can still have a key light and create some intensity on one side, but it's always good to have lights everywhere. Otherwise you're just going to get some dark patches when you spin the models round. That's pretty much it for all of the basics as far as the software. The next tutorial will really cover the actual physical creation of the interactive lessons using the tools that I've just gone through.